Hey everyone, welcome back. We are going to continue on the party screen this video, but before that, let's make some small changes. I'm going to go to the town scene and I just want to fill up the pathways in the town. So I'll go to overworld tile map, select grass to auto tile, and I'm going to fill up these tiles. Now that we finished that, let's go to Oak's lab. And for the door, let's right click and make it editable children so we can edit the sprite. And if you notice, we still have the red door for Oak's lab and it's a green door. So we have another door sprite sheet for that under assets, buildings, door animation, and Oak's lab. So I'll click and drag into the texture field and it should work as is. Now let's do some refactoring of our code. So let's create a utils script. So in our file browser, let's right click on the root folder and then we'll do new script, right click, new script, utils.gd. Let's create this. And let's go to utils.gd. And we're going to have this as an auto load script, meaning that it'll be always running and we can access this script from any of our nodes. So let's go to project settings, go to the auto load tab, and then let's find our util script, utils.gd, and let's add it. And now it's an auto load script, which is good. And within this script, let's create some helper functions that we're going to use often. So one function would be get player node. So I'll call it get player. And here we'll return the player node. We can do get underscore node, and then we'll supply the path. So we know the player is underneath root scene manager, current scene. If we go to another script, for instance, tallgrass.gd, we can reuse the way we get the player node. So we go back to utils and it's dot get children of current scene, and then we find the player node. Let's return it. Now that we have this function, we can use this instead of finding the player node each and every time we want to find it. So let's erase this, utils dot get player. And that should work. And now let's replace all the other times that we try to get the player. So Control Shift F, and let's search for find node. In Scene Manager, we have one case. So let's delete this and instead use utils.getPlayer. In our menu script, we also have it, utils.getPlayer, also here, and one in our door script. Great, now let's go back to our util script and let's create another helper function. And let's call this get scene manager because we use this often as well. And we'll do return get underscore node, and it'll just be root scene manager. Now let's go to places where we reference the scene manager node. So one place is in the menu script, menu.gd, and here. So we do get parent transition to party screen. So instead of get parent, let's do utils dot get underscore scene manager. And let's also do it in this case as well. And another place is in the door script, door.gd. If I scroll down here, we have this get node scene manager. So instead, we'll do utils.get scene manager. Great. So now if we ever change the structure of our nodes, we just have to change it in one place, which is convenient later on. And I also want to move the utils.gd script into its own folder so we can keep track of all of our autoload scripts. So let's right click at the root, new folder, and I'll call this autoload. And I'll drag utils.gd in there as well. Now let's go back to our menu script. And I noticed that for our menu options, our select arrow, whenever we move it down by 14, it's actually not enough. I found that 15 works better. So let's do that instead. And here. Cool. Let's now start on working on the party screen. We'll start off by creating a sample Pokemon party so we can visualize it and understand how the nodes are going to be structured. Let's add a node 2D, and this is going to be our first Pokemon slot. First Pokemon slot. And let's add a sprite, and we'll call this background. And in our assets folder, under UI, under Pokemon Party, we have an image called main Pokemon background. So let's use that for texture. And as you notice, there's two images. One is unselected and one is selected. So let's go to animation and make sure that H frames, the number of columns, is set to 2. And let's move this image in place. So I'm going to use the arrow keys so I can move it 1 pixel at a time. And that looks like the right spot. And let's add another sprite to the slot node. And this is going to be our Pokemon image. So I'll just call it Pokemon Party Sprite. And if you go to our assets folder, and we have a folder called Pokemon, and we have a bunch of images. And I'll start off with Charmander, drag that to the texture. And if you notice, it contains several different images. And for the party screen, we only care about these two images at the top. And the other images are for battle screens. So what we could do is go to region and let's tick on enabled. And what region allows us to do is specify a region in the image that we care about. And let's go to the bottom of our screen and you see texture region. And let's drag this up. Let's center it. I'm going to zoom in. And let's select the area of the images that we care about, like that. And I think in the rec section, let's just make this 30. That can stay as 9. Let's set the width to be 70. And I think that looks even. Great. And we have two images here. So we go to animation and we set the H frames to be 2. So we can animate the frames and make the Pokemon appear like they're breathing. And now let's move it in place. And that should be good. And now let's quickly add a animation player so we can animate the Pokemon. Animation player. Let's create a new animation. We'll just call it idle. I'll zoom in. And we want to animate the frame property of this Pokemon sprite. So let's click on Pokemon Party Sprite. Let's key the frame. Let's create it. And at around midway, 0.5 seconds, let's set it to be the next frame. And also let's set it to be looping and play on start. So we can set the autoplay on load to be enabled. Okay, cool. Let's add another sprite for the Pokemon name. So sprite, I'm going to rename this be Pokemon name. Drag it up 1. Let's click on it and let's move the Charmander sprite into the texture field again. We want to clip the Pokemon name here. So either we can do texture region and zoom in and select this, but let's go to region. Let's make sure it's enabled. And the correct values are y is -1, width is 73, and height is 10. Yeah, so let's use that instead. And let's move it in place. And that should be good. We can also use a label node instead of a sprite node and clipping the image so we can have custom names and we can change it on runtime. But for now, I'm just going to stick with using the image here. And later on, if we decide to have nicknames for a Pokemon, then we would have to change this to a label node. Let's add another node for the level text. So this can be a label because we're going to change it often. And I'll rename it to be level label. And within text, we'll just put 4 for now. And let's go to custom fonts, create a new dynamic font, click on it again, expand the font section, and let's go to our font file, which is in our assets under the UI folder. Let's drag it in and let's make it smaller. So settings, I'll keep it at 10. And let's drag it in next to our level text. All right. And now let's duplicate that and let's create a label for the health. So health label, and I'm going to drag it down here. I'll give another value like 23 and I'll leave it here for now. And let's duplicate once again. And we're going to create max health label. I'm going to drag it here and I'll give a value of 30. And let's add another sprite for the gender icon. So sprite, let's rename this to be gender icon. And in our Pokemon party folder, we can drag the gender icon's texture in. Let's move it to the correct place. Since there's 2 images, we go to animation and we set each frames to be 2. And I'll put it off to the side around here. And there's one more node that we should add, and that's the health bar itself, the colored health bar. It can be green, yellow, or red. So let's create another sprite, and let's rename it to be health bar. And we have a health bar image here. So let's drag that in to our texture. And let's move it in place. So it contains all 3 colors. So within our code, we would have to do some changing of the properties so we only show one color. And for now, we can just go to region, tick on enabled, and let's set the offset to be 24 and the width to be 24 and the height to be 3. And we just have the green section now. And then we can modify the scale to fill it up, modify the scale in the X direction. Set it to be 2 and it'll be fully green. And for now, that should be good. At least visually, we have all the nodes that we need for our Pokemon slot. And within code, in a later time, we will be able to adjust these values. Now let's do the other slots. So it's going to be almost the same thing, but since the main slot is different, we would have to rearrange the elements, but that's pretty much it. So let's select first Pokemon slot, Control D to duplicate, and I'll minimize that. And I'll call this second Pokemon slot. Hold Alt, and then let's click and drag, and I'll put it right around here. Let's change the background, and we have a standby Pokemon background texture in our assets folder. Let's use this instead. And I'm going to move this image in place. That looks good. And now we want to move the Pokemon party sprite in place as well. I think that looks good. Let's move the Pokemon name in place as well. That's fine. I'm going to move the level text, the gender icon, the health bar, and the health text. All right. Now that we have this set up, we can easily change the Pokemon by selecting Pokemon Party Sprite and Pokemon Name, because those are the only 2 elements that are dependent on the Pokemon images that we have in our assets folder. So let's go to Pokemon and let's try Bulbasaur this time. So let's click and drag into the texture property. Since we already set up the region property, now we just click and drag new images and it'll easily change to different Pokemons, which is neat. Now let's do another one. So let's Control D to duplicate the second one, and we'll call this third Pokemon slot. Hold Alt, click and drag, and let's move it in place. That should be good. And let's select Pokemon Party Sprite, hold Shift and click on Pokemon Name. And let's try, I think I have Squirtle somewhere. Yeah, Squirtle's at the end. Let's drag that into the texture property. And now we have Squirtle. Cool. Let's do this a couple more times. Control D, duplicate. Fourth Pokemon slot. Select Pokemon Party Sprite, Pokemon Name. And let's add Pidgey. Control D, duplicate. Let's rename this to be fifth Pokemon slot. And also let's move Pidgey down one. I think fifth, yeah. Okay. So let's move the fourth Pokemon slot. It's this one into place. And let's select Pokemon Party Sprite and Pokemon Name for the fifth slot. And let's click and drag Pikachu. And one last time, Control D duplicate. And this is our last slot. So sixth Pokemon slot. And let's use Onyx for this one. All right, cool. Now we have Pokemon in our party screen, but it's only visual for now. Later on, we can add code for it to be functional. Now let's add another sprite, and this is for the cancel button sprite. So let's click on Pokemon party screen, Control A, sprite, and I'll call this cancel sprite. And within our UI folder, we have an exit background button. Let's drag that into the texture. Let's move it in place. Since it's two images, let's go to animation. H frames is set to 2. Let's move this to the correct spot. All right, great. Now we want to be able to move and select different Pokemon using the arrow keys. So to do that, let's add a script. So Pokemon party screen, let's add a script. Let's create. And first, I'm going to create an enum for the different types of slots. So the different options that we have. And I'll call the enum options. And the first option is the first slot. And we'll go all the way to the sixth slot. And one more option, and that's the cancel button. That's another option. And enums, all they are just integers. So first slot would map to 0, second would be 1, third will be 2, and all the way to 6. And let's create a variable called selected underscore option. And we'll, by default, set it to be option.first slot. Options.first slot. And you can also consider this as an integer. That helps. Now we need to get access to each and every slot node and the cancel sprite node. And we also want to map it to our enum. So an easy way to do that is onReadyVar, and let's create options, and let's create a dictionary. A dictionary is a key value map. So the key can be the option enum, so first slot, and we have to put options first, options.first slot, and we can get access to the child node. And it'll be first Pokemon slot. And what I want to change is actually the background of the Pokemon slot. So if I open it up here, background, and I want to be able to change the frame so it can be set to be the active. So if I go to frame, increase it by 1, it highlights and it shows the active selected sprite. And that's what I want to modify whenever we move our arrow keys. I'll set it back to 0. So let's do a slash, and then we'll do background as well. And that's what we want to get access to. And let's duplicate this line and do second slot. And change this to be second as well. Options.third slot. Options.fourth slot. And options.cancel. And this maps to cancel sprite. All right, cool. And now I want to create some helper functions. The first helper function is func unset active option. And all we want to do is set options at selected option. So selected option is our variable right here. And that's our current option that we're on. And options is the dictionary. So at selected option, so say if we're by default on first slot, we access the values stored at options at first slot. And that will return this node right here. First Pokemon slot background. And once we have access to that, we just do dot frame and set it to be 0. So 0 is the frame where it's the unselected sprite. And we're unsetting it in this function. And let's create another function called set active option. And we do the same thing here, but we just set it to be 1. And then in our ready function, we can do set active option. So once we start, we'll set the first slot to be the active slot. We also want to handle input whenever the player presses up, down, left, right. We want to update the active option. So let's create the input function and let's handle the different cases. So if event is action pressed, UI down, and in this case, we want to go down the options list. So if we're at first slot, we want to go to the second slot. If we're at the cancel slot, we want to wrap around and go back to the first slot. So first, we want to unset the active option that we are on right now, and let's update our selected option. So selected option +1, because we're increasing it, but in the case that we're on the last node, we want to wrap around. So we can do that by modulo and the size of all of our options. And we have 7. Modulo 7. And then we can do set active option. And don't worry that we're doing +1 on an enum, because an enum is essentially just an integer. Else if event is action pressed, UI up, we'll do unset active option. And let's first check if selected option is equal to 0, because now we can't decrement and go to negative. We should go to the last one. So we'll just set selected option, and the last one is options.cancel. So we'll do options.cancel. I'm going to zoom in a little bit. Else, we can just decrement it normally. Cool. So we covered the down and up keys. We can also implement functionality whenever we press left and right. So say we press event is action pressed UI left. We want to go to the main slot if we're on the right hand side. So we'll do unset active option, and we'll just set the selected option to be 0, which is the main slot, which is on the left hand side. And then we'll just do set active option. And let's remember to set active option at the end of our up case as well. And then if we press the right key, and the right key should only take effect if we're on the left-hand side, which is just the main option, and that's index 0. So and selected option is equal to options dot first slot. If that's the case, first we'll unset the active option. We'll set the selected option to be 1 for now, so it goes to the right-hand side, and set the active option again. All right, great. And there's another functionality that we want to add. Say that we are on the cancel button and we press Z. Then we want to exit out and go to the normal screen again. So let's do else if event is action pressed Z. And for now, let's do a match case for selected option. And if the case is option.cancel, we want to exit the screen. And the way we do this is by calling the scene manager's transition function. And we have the utils function to get scene manager. So utils.get scene manager. And then we have to call transition. And there's a specific function, and I think it's called transition exit party screen. Let me add an S right here. So let's go to the scene manager script to double check what the function is. Transition exit party screen. So what it does is it'll play fade to black, and then once it's finished fading, it will unload the party screen right here. Cool. And that should be all for that. So let's click play and finally see what we're working with. All right, I'll look at the water, press enter, press Z, open up our party screen. And great, on load up, our main Pokemon, Charmander, is what's highlighted. Now let's press the right key. We go to Bulbasaur. Let's press the left key. We go back to Charmander. Let's press the down key. We go to Bulbasaur, Squirtle, Pidgey, and we go to cancel. Press down again. We go back to Charmander. We press up. We go back to cancel. And it looks like it's working as we expect it to. And let's try pressing Z on our Pokemon slots. Nothing happens because we did not implement anything for that. But if we go to cancel and we press Z, then we exit, which is cool. Press X and we're back to our town. All right, great. We made some progress now. Thanks for watching and take care. If you enjoyed this video and found it helpful, consider dropping a like and consider subscribing if you haven't already. Take care.